Slowly it rises.
Hey, it's ODB, the Lincoln Addict, back with another review. This is one that I'm very anxious to jump into, so I hope that you guys will follow me as I go through this 64 Lincoln Continental Convertible deep dive. I do want to just let you know, if you go to lincolnaddict.com, you can find ways to listen to the podcast. If you go to info, how to listen, there's a couple of links here. You can also listen right on, typically on YouTube. For some of the newer episodes, there are a few shirts and a few stickers left if you want to make a purchase there. So this car went live about 24 hours ago, and I had an opportunity today to kind of really look through it. It's a nice car, in my opinion, and one that we don't see a lot. A lot of these nicer cars or cars that have had some money invested in them, a lot of these cars aren't coming up for sale very often. So I want to kind of go down the deep dive, if you will. Basically, what I've done is I prepared my slides here. So we'll kind of go through this at a quicker pace, and then we'll jump back over and go through some more detail on the listing itself. So this Bring a Trailer listing review is for the 64, of course. We'll also break down the vehicle warranty number, serial number, if you will. We know in 64, if we look here, there were 3,328. This is my spreadsheet. 3,328 produced for the convertibles at a price of $6,938. That was only $646 higher, as it was each of the previous years, than the sedan, if you can believe that. Now, if we look at the Haggerty valuation tool, you'll see that these cars range anywhere from $25K to over just north of $100K. And we'll kind of talk about where do I think this car will fall in that range. This is one of the key photos here, which, again, we'll jump back on. This is copy and pasted from Bring a Trailer. It mentions 6,600 miles shown. My thought process would be more than likely it's 106,600. We don't really know. It really depends if the odometer is still working, if it's been counting the miles over the years. But certainly, I would assume that it's not 6,600. If we look at the Lincoln registry, you all have, if you've been here before, you know that I'll kind of reference this. You can go to or just Google the Lincoln registry. The website is listed there as well, but it takes a moment to load. But when you paste in the VIN, this car was added back in 2019. And the gentleman that runs this actually, if you click on that red VIN, it takes you into a little bit more info. And he also kind of monitors some of these cars that are coming up for sale, and he was able to update it and add the photo that you see there. The VIN door plate you see there is copied and pasted. It starts up here 4Y. So if you've been coming to this channel, you may be able to kind of break these down now. The number 4 is in reference to the year, so that's 64. These cars were built in Wixom, Michigan. 86 is the body style for that year, which is convertible. The N is the Mel 430. That's pretty standard. The last 6 digits always begin with the number 4. So you're really concerned with the last 5 digits, in this case 12188, which references it's the 12,188th built for that model year. Now, I know you may say, hey, Jason, you mentioned a little while ago there were only 3,328 convertibles built for the 64 model year. That is correct, but if you add up the sedans, the convertibles, and the limos, there were 36,312 total. So that 12,188 is the number out of that 36,312, if that makes sense. The VIN plate decoded, if you will, is the way I kind of spin it. 74A is the four-door convertible. Now, this is one thing that we'll talk a little bit more about a little bit later. If you look at this, and again, Bring a Trailer, we'll jump over there in a moment. they break down this information as well. So you don't really, I don't necessarily have to do it, but the color code, I did re-verify that was the Huron Blue, which I'm a big fan of. I know you're thinking, hey, it's not Huron Blue, so we'll talk about it. The trim was also blue, that 82, that is the blue interior. Now, the date, someone has chimed in and they've helped me with this, and I had to go back and reference a couple of documents I have. The 18L, so the 1/8 is the day of the month, and the L represents the month. So if you go A would be January, B, February, so on and so forth, right? Well, my understanding and looking back at some other documentation, and someone has also chimed in here before, they did not use the letter I because it could be mistaken for a number 1. So I made this little basic chart. And if you take a look here, the L would, of course, be November. So that's also what Bring a Trailer has listed, November 18th. So again, the L is November. That's the 11th month. If you skip over the letter I, which could be confused for a number 1. And the 18 references the day in that calendar, so November 18th. And then, of course, 1963, remember the production started a couple of months prior to that. So this car, ironically, was built 60 years ago this month on the 18th, and that happened to be the day that JFK was actually in Tampa. I know that because of some research, and we're doing our Tampa Kennedy cruise on the Saturday before Thanksgiving, which this year happens to be November 18th. So very ironic. 53 DSO is Oakland, California. The axle and the trans are pretty typical. Now, what I want to do is I want to jump over here to the listing and kind of look at some of the photos. Since I kind of started with that presentation, you could see here front 3/4 shot. To me, we've already established that this car has been repainted at some time, okay? I do think that the white color and the red interior, very, very classy. We can also see here, which the seller mentions in the comments, 64 Abe. That's a nod to 64 Abe, and then what's Abe's last name? Abe Lincoln. So 64 Lincoln. So kind of a cool little black and yellow plate, which I believe can be my assumption from what I understand is that when the seller sells a car like this, they can also include those plates and they can be re-registered in California. I don't know about other states. I doubt other states, but some people have told me they think that they can register them in other states as well. I don't know how true that is. You guys can kind of chime in. I think one of the key things you're going to see when I go through the pros on this one is this convertible is said to have been registered in California and was later acquired by the seller's uncle in 92. And then they talk about a cosmetic refreshment. The car was later inherited by the gentleman that has it now in 2020. And there's an extensive amount of money and time that's went into this car. You know, not a full-blown restoration, but something that I think you don't typically see someone go and spend some money on a car that, you know, that they're going to put in $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, you know, just to make it nicer. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but for a car to come up for sale, they don't always come up for sale like this. So I think this is going to be a nice one. Basically, they give you just a little bit of information here. Of course, the 64 model was lengthened a little bit. So they talk about the wheelbase. They talk about the original colors. And the power-operated top was recovered in 92. So about 30 years into its existence, the top was redone. A lot of this is just basic information. They do talk about the master cylinder and wheel cylinders were rebuilt, rear shock, steering box spacers, and so on. A lot of that's going to also coincide with what we'll see in the receipts. I have a 65 with red interior. I've become a big fan of red interiors. When I look at this interior, it looks really, really nice. And if you've seen some of these cars here, although we know this was redone, this wasn't the original, unless, you know, some of these parts came from a parts car, so to speak, maybe the door panels and whatnot. Certainly we can look at it and say, wow, it is a nice interior from these photos. Like the seats, to me, they just look really, really nice. Even with these little bit of cracks and stuff, I love that kind of that authenticity. If we look down here at the brake pedal, or the throttle, if you will, and kind of the corner of the brake pedal, it all looks really, really nice, kind of just reinforcing like this car probably wasn't driven, and when it wasn't driven a lot, I mean, let's say over 100,000 miles is kind of a lot, but at the same time, you could see that it was kind of cared for the most part. If we get down here, they talk about some of the other components that were redone, like a real nice refresh, tune-up, if you will, a lot of stuff that was done. We also see photos on a lift, so this is fantastic. We can see the exhaust is new. We can see underneath this car is exactly the way, if I was buying a Lincoln, I would want the car to look underneath here. It's very kind of authentic. Nothing's really been painted underneath it. We can kind of tell what we're getting. Here's where the photo came from, the VIN plate or the door plate. This is where they've broken down all of the information as well. This is some of the literature and manuals, if you will. Now, these videos are done really well. The engine starting was pretty basic. And if we go through some of these other different videos, basically he shows the top working, the auto drops working, the windows working. These are fantastic videos, so they did a good job there. Now, if we jump back over here, what I wanted to reinforce is if we just go through briefly the pros of this listing. So it's a desirable year. Certainly, again, as I've always said, there's some people that love the 1s, 2s, and 3s. There's, a lot of us that love the 64s and 65s just as much, if not more. There were 3,328, of course, convertibles, as we talked about in 64. It is a DSO, so the destination sales office for California is Oakland. That's a good thing. You've heard me talk about it's a dry climate. More than likely, this car, from what I can tell, was very well cared for. It was always kept indoors. All of that stuff is good. The seller/family has owned this car for 30 plus years. So I do believe he mentioned like when he inherited it from his uncle, it was a family member that he obtained it from. The seller has put some money into the car, so we'll look at that. We've got receipts to back it up. The transmission has been rebuilt, which is fantastic. The color combo, I think, is very classy. The trunk area looks amazing. You don't always see cars with a super nice trunk area. John Cashman worked on the car. That also includes John installed the crossbar in the trunk between the convertible top bracketry, which I always talk about. John preached this for years. You got to do that in 64, 65. There's tons of literature and receipts that accompany the sale. There's new exhaust. There's a lot more as well that we will look into. If we just go through the photos, I want to not make this video the longest ever, so I'm going to just kind of go through these a little quick, but really, I can tell, I mean, you can even tell from where this home is at, whether this person lives here or it's a friend's house or whatever. I would assume they live here. If they've got some money, we can tell that they put some money into this car. We can also see them in one of the videos when they're driving out. Of course, the car is here and they drive out of this gate. So more than likely, this is their residence. That's a key thing. Like I've said in the past, looking at the, what's around, is it a dilapidated place? Is it a beautiful place like this? It kind of shows a little bit of insight into the seller and kind of maybe what you're going to be getting here. I also like that they show with the top up and the top down, which I think is good. You'll also see in the receipts, the insulation padding has been changed under the hood, which is fantastic. From here, I think it's also worth, and whenever I start to zoom in is really when I get in trouble on this Mac sometimes. So I'm going to try not to zoom in as much. The weather stripping in here all looks really good, whether this was recently detailed or just because of the dry climate. A lot of times the weather stripping will look kind of ratty on cars, even if it's a nicer car. And if you go to Steel Rubber, who I partner with through my podcast, you could easily spend $3,000 plus on buying all of the weather stripping, believe it or not, on these cars, including like this piece that goes up here. But what we can tell here is, again, what you would expect on a nice car like this, that the weather stripping, at least there, looks really, really nice. To me, the bright work looks really nice on this car. You've got, of course, the rear plate, the black and yellow from California as well, and then just various photos. Now, they did take a bunch of photos, and as I'm going through these, like even like kind of looking at some of this here, typically like on my cars or on my 64, these pieces aren't perfect, and they can usually be polished up and stuff. But like looking at all of this, I mean, sure, it may not be 100% perfect. You could probably point out a couple little minor things, but overall, it's really, really nice. Like maybe there's a little dent or ding right there. But again, that's being very, very picky. I think, in my opinion, having looked at this one earlier today, it's a very, very, very nice car. I do believe this one's going to sell for a good amount. I would hope so. There's a sedan that I have not covered that recently sold, kind of a custom sedan that sold for $45,000, flat black. So I think if a sedan can bring in 40 and a half, let's call it almost 50 grand, certainly a convertible of this prestige should bring in a nice dollar amount. It does have new carpet. The receipts will back that up, as well as I have these same exact floor mats in my 65 that came from my friend that I purchased it from. We could also see in here, if you've been watching the channel, I talk about this is kind of what we call a unicorn part. This little guy right here tends to get lost over the course of time. All it is a little ring that says ignition. But typically, if those are gone, that'll just, not look as nice right there. We can see all the lighting. It looks like it's the original incandescent bulbs, which I do like, kind of that glow, if you will, of those old school lights versus the LEDs. I have one car with LEDs. I have one with the incandescent bulbs, and I just kind of tend to like the warmness of the old school bulbs. Again, you can see they took night and day photos. I think that was fantastic. I like to kind of look around here on the doors and kind of see, is there anything we can glean? Like sometimes there'll be little rips and stuff. You can kind of tell, was something filled in? Did they have somebody? But I mean, for the most part, what I can tell is, this interior looks really, really nice. Again, not saying it's, a concourse car, but certainly, if you're someone looking for a nice car, this is going to be one probably that's going to pique your interest. We can see here inside, there's no signs of any kind of corrosion or nastiness that we sometimes will see. As I mentioned, inside the trunk area, looks very, very, very nice. Some of these marks where what we are missing here is and it could be under this, but there are two little black pads that are typically lost, and those are screwed down, and that's kind of where the top sits. And I believe that helps to eliminate these little marks that are sometimes left. You could easily clean this off. This is no big deal. That's of little to no concern, in my opinion. But I just happened to notice that, so I wanted to point it out. What we can see here in the engine bay is, number one, it is a non-AC car. This could be a deal breaker for some. I wouldn't think for most, because you put the top down, who really cares, right? That means there's no fan shroud. That also means there is a different fan, so I think it's one less blade. It also has the single master cylinder reservoir, although it may have been changed. I always like to promote the dual in the event that the master cylinder goes out. If you have a dual, you have two, if you will, reservoirs. So that's one thing I would potentially add. I got to give kudos to the seller. He actually took and lifted the battery out to kind of show you underneath the battery tray. You can see here a little bit of paint. This is nice. Typically, you'll see where there's a lot of corrosion and stuff down here. And again, this reinforces. I think they're doing a great job at displaying this car online via an auction. This guy right here, this brass fitting, those are typical. There's a piece here that usually will rot out. And if you go to the usual suspects, as we call them, the usual places, they do sell it looks like a plastic type fitting, a T-fitting. But certainly those are kind of expensive from the different places you could buy them from. So a lot of folks will go and just add in this T-fitting. That is not technically accurate if you were looking to be 100% accurate, but I have that on my car and it works great. We could see here it does have the 3-port, so it doesn't have the 2 screws, which would have indicated that it was a 2-port. We do like the 3 ports. They do tend to help avoid vapor lock on these older cars. Again, there's more photos here as we go through. There are receipts showing the exhaust has been done. All of this kind of surface rust underneath here, this is all normal stuff on an undercarriage of a 60-year-old car. In my opinion, you could detail this thing to the nines if you really wanted to. That's the nice thing about buying, as I've always said, try to buy the nicest car you can based upon your budget or what you can find at the time when you're looking to make a purchase. That's going to really help, in my opinion, in the long run. Now, I do not want to go through these receipts in detail. I literally looked through every line item earlier. There is a lot of stuff. I'm going to point out here an $8,000 receipt, a $7,000 receipt from John Cashman, additional information from John back in June 2021. You've got stereo components, which is hidden under the dash for Bluetooth, he mentions. You have stainless steel exhaust. There's a $1,462 receipt. Here's more audio equipment, again, that you can't see, which is fantastic. Here's the carpet kit and the floor mats, another $1,100. Here's another invoice for almost $600. Here's another Cashman invoice for another $680. The reason why I'm saying this is a lot of people, this was $2,250 to install the new carpet, to take out the seats and do some work there. Here's the transmission, $3,680, actually $4,730. So almost $5,000, right? So a lot of folks don't always believe me when you say, hey, you can get a decent car that needs everything, and you can easily spend $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 redoing every aspect of it to make it almost like a new car. And again, not everybody believes that, but again, if you want to take the time, certainly go through those receipts. The key call out. So if you want an all original car, well, this car has been repainted as we got down to the nitty gritty. That may be a deal breaker for you. Certainly it would not be for me. It is a non-AC car, would not be a deal breaker for me. If you're looking to customize a 60s Lincoln, okay, dare I say this, I would suggest not customizing this one, as it's just, in my opinion, simply too nice. I think the purists will appreciate that comment from me. I love a custom Lincoln, but I also love a factory super nice car, and to me this is a very nice car. Things to consider. Now, really, this car looks so nice, there isn't much to be worried about in my opinion, but these two items are always something to keep in mind. And number one, and I guess I forgot to type the second one. Number one is the timing gear. So I've talked about in other videos on my channel that in the 60s Lincolns and in other Ford products, behind the water pump, when you take off the timing setup, that timing gear is made with some composite material on the outside, and it tends to chip away over time, and it can get down it goes down in the oil pan, and it can clog up the oil pump. That again is not specific to this car, but certainly I did not find anything in the receipts that showed that was done. So that's certainly just something, in my opinion, that you should look into. The other item, which I forgot to type in here, as I was multitasking earlier, was the amp gauge. So this guy right here in 64, 65, they are known to eventually kind of blow out. This is the best way I can kind of explain it. And again, I'm not saying it's a deal breaker. This is just for public knowledge. It's 64, 65. You essentially have to take this apart or have someone do it. And this amp gauge either needs to be rebuilt, replaced, or you could even go with a modern style gauge like Decoded Digital. Although in this car with the originality, I would probably just have it rebuilt by someone like Blair Farmer, who's here in the Clearwater area. Now, I didn't see anything that showcased that it was, and certainly you could drive this car 100,000 miles and not have an issue. But these cars do tend to, over the course of time, the wiring for inside the car all goes through the amp gauge, and over time it can become brittle. We've seen over the course of time a couple of dash fires. We've seen other challenges that can happen from it. Again, it's not a deal breaker. It's specific to 64, 65, and it's just something to call out. So I would mention those two things. In closing, I would say if we go back to the price evaluation, to me, this is easily over a $70,000 convertible. Where will it sell exactly? I can't tell you that. I certainly think it should easily fall any day of the week between 70 and 80 grand, especially with some of the car prices we've seen. I'd like to see it go over 80. I do think this is a nice car. And certainly if I was in the market, this is my opinion, I would go after this car. I mean, this person has spent a considerable amount of time and money. The auto drops work. It's got pretty much everything most of you guys would want. This person had a cool comment. Not always a fan of personalized plates, but Abe and then Lincoln is perfect. That's kind of cool. He chimes in. He's 64 Abe here. He answers a bunch of questions. There was some confusion whether it had tilt column. It does not. So he apologized for any confusion there in the write-up. But certainly, let me know what you guys think. I do think it's solid. Of course, it's not 100% original. We established that. But certainly, I think someone's going to be real happy to drive this one. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Take care and stay on the rise. ODB, we out of here.